Now, I want to cover a story that's not getting a lot of attention, and it should be. And by the way, it's about to absolutely like thunderstorm and lightning here in New York City. So that definitely is symbolic of the current state of this corporation. I mean country, because we are the United Corporations of America. So, as you remember, there was an African-American man by the name of Eric Garner who was choked to death by New York City police a couple years ago. He was in the street selling cigarettes. In 2014, it's not exactly crime of the century stuff. I think they said he was selling illegal cigarettes, something like that. So, like in every other case, the cops got off for illegally choking this man to death as he stood there screaming, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. The cop who killed him got off. Grand jury decided not to indict him for reasons I truly can't even fathom. And Eric Garner's family has been fighting for justice for years since. Any justice would be nice. Well, new text messages came out showing you exactly how much the life of Eric Garner was worth to the New York City Police Department. A police commander in Staten Island received text messages from one of his officers in July 2014, informing him that a man identified as Eric Garner had been arrested and was most likely dead on arrival after he had been wrestled to the ground. Not a big deal, the lieutenant replied. We were effecting a lawful arrest. Audible gasps were heard as the texts were read aloud on Thursday during a police disciplinary hearing for Officer Daniel Pantaleo. He is accused of recklessly using a chokehold that led to Mr. Garner's death after he was detained on the suspicion that he was selling untaxed cigarettes. The text and testimony provided unsettling new details in one of the most wrenching cases of suspected police misconduct in New York. Let me repeat this. He's texted, not a big deal, the lieutenant replied. We were effecting a lawful arrest. So, you would text not a big deal to somebody who works for you if they, mailed something to the wrong address. You wouldn't like it, but okay. Or if they got something wrong, spelled something wrong, in our case. Not a big deal. Change it as soon as you can. The New York Police Department lieutenant got a text that this guy is dead, and it was not exactly, the best of cases, which I'm about to read to you, and says, not a big deal. The officer has never faced criminal charges. A grand jury on Staten Island declined to indict Officer Pantaleo in 2014. A federal civil rights inquiry has dragged on for years without charges being filed. The statute of limitations expires on July 17th, the 5th anniversary of Mr. Garner's death. So the statute of limitations is in 2 months. An independent police watchdog agency, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, brought the current charges against Officer Pantaleo, which resulted in this week's hearing. The evidence at the hearing picked up events from the police department's perspective, while Mr. Garner, who is at least 6 feet 3 inches tall and had asthma so severe that he quit his job, was lying motionless on the ground on Bay Street near the Staten Island ferry. The communication started with Sergeant Samanoff messaging Lieutenant Bannon and telling him that Mr. Garner had been wrestled to the ground, and then adding, he's most likely dead on arrival, using the abbreviation for DOA, using the abbreviation for dead on arrival. He has no pulse, Sergeant Samanoff wrote. After acknowledging the message, Lieutenant Bannon wrote his follow-up note, now linking not a big deal with I can't breathe, as the two defining quotations for Mr. Garner's death. No big deal, Gwen Carr, Mr. Garner's mother, angrily told reporters outside the police department headquarters in Lower Manhattan, where the hearing was held. If one of his loved ones was on the ground dead and someone came up to him and said, it's no big deal, how would you feel about it? During Monday's testimony, the supervisor who oversaw the police's internal review, Deputy Inspector Charles Barton, said that in 2015 he ordered the lead investigator to recommend disciplinary charges against Officer Pantaleo. but the department's internal prosecution unit never filed charges. Look at that. The police protect their own. The medical examiner who performed an autopsy on Mr. Garner testified on Wednesday that the chokehold set into motion a lethal sequence that led to the asthma attack that killed him. Officer Pantaleo's lawyer, Stuart London, said that his client used an approved maneuver, a seatbelt hold, that the police have been trained to use in incidents where people act violently or are being arrested. But the commanding officer of the police academy, Deputy Inspector Richard D., testified on Tuesday that Officer Pantaleo's actions meet the definition of a chokehold. He added that the seatbelt maneuver was never taught nor approved by the department in 2006 when Officer Pantaleo went through the academy, or in 2008 when he received training to become plainclothes officer. Mr. London said this week that his client has been a scapegoat and added that Mr. Garner was in poor health and that he set these factors in motion by resisting arrest. Oh my God. Okay. Well, so right now, objectively, I'm in pretty poor health. Just had back surgery. I've got tape around my foot because when I woke up from back surgery, the numbness was a lot better in my foot, but now I have plantar fasciitis, which I've never even heard of, but of course I have it. So I have tape around my foot and I'm icing and all these things. So if something happens where I need to run or I need to boogie, I can't do it. If I get killed because I can't run, are they going to be like, oh, well, he should have ran? Well, I can't run right now. It's not my fault. My back got messed up, largely from traveling. I also fell in Standing Rock, slipped on ice, and fell down not a huge hill, but a tiny hill, and hurt my back even more. So this is the equivalent of saying somebody with back problems or saying somebody who has diabetes or whatever, you're responsible for your own death. We illegally choked you out. We wouldn't let up when I said I can't breathe. You're responsible because you were in poor health. That's beyond blaming the victim. That's savagery coming from the New York Police Department. Mr. London used the testimony of Lieutenant Bannon, Sergeant Samonath, and 2 other officers who were involved in the arrest to try to establish that his client was an exemplary officer and that Mr. Garner had been resisting arrest. But the introduction of the text messages under cross-examination by prosecutors from the Civilian Complaint Review Board seemed to damage the defense's case. Lieutenant Bannon was pressed by one prosecutor, Susan O'Hare, to explain his text message. My reasoning, he said, was not to be malicious. It's to make sure the officer knew he was put in a bad situation. Oh, the officer was the one put in a bad situation. Because for the sale of untaxed cigarettes, you needed 4 or 5 officers swarming a large man and taking him down for untaxed cigarettes? Would they do that to a white man? I don't think so. Would you agree that Eric Garner was put in a bad situation? Mr. O'Hare asked. Lieutenant Bannon hesitated for several seconds. I don't know how to answer that. Of course you don't know how to answer that. The testimony on Thursday also focused on the low-level quality of life enforcement that the police were conducting in the weeks before Mr. Garner's death. Mr. Garner was arrested 3 times during that crackdown, the final one on the day he died. Quote, the arrest of Eric Garner was a result of a chain of decisions originating at the very highest levels of the New York Police Department. Patrick J. Lynch, the president of the Police Benevolent Association, said after the hearing, police officers who enforce quality of life offenses are not cowboys or free agents. They follow the direction of their supervisors, who in turn are responding to complaints from the community. Yeah, because I know all my neighbors are saying, if you see a big black man on the corner selling untaxed cigarettes, choke him out. Police unions, I'm pro-union, but these police unions are disgusting. They're the same police unions who are defending Jason Van Dyke in Chicago, who shot Laquan McDonald 16 times. When he was already lifeless, probably after the 3rd or 4th shot. Who, by the way, you want to talk about how terrible corporate media is? The Atlantic magazine and website literally just made now former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel an ideas contributor. He's now an ideas columnist, Rahm Emanuel, the same Rahm Emanuel who helped the police department cover up the Laquan McDonald execution, the same Rahm Emanuel who basically has, left most of Chicago to rot while beautifying and gentrifying and pouring in millions of Wall Street money into that Riverwalk area downtown, which is very beautiful. I've walked it. It's nice. But if you look around the rest of Chicago, he's let it rot. The same Rahm Emanuel that has allowed a police force to become a militarized occupying force in Chicago. Ty and I were there last summer. We saw it. We covered it. In other news related to the Eric Garner death, Daniel Pantaleo's trial on the Eric Garner chokehold case is delayed yet again. Not a criminal trial, whether he should be administrative trial. After taking a 4-day break, the administrative trial of Officer Daniel Pantaleo on charges that he used a banned chokehold in the death of Eric Garner in 2014 continued on Tuesday, running 3 hours before taking another hiatus that will last 2 weeks. The slow progress appears to be frustrating all parties involved except Pantaleo and his lawyers, who told an irate judge, Rosemario Maldonado, that the delay was unavoidable as a witness they would like to call is currently unavailable. The witness, a medical examiner from Missouri, is expected to challenge the New York City medical examiner's determination that Garner's death was a homicide brought on by a chokehold. But Pantaleo's attorneys said their witness cannot travel now because he is currently the only medical examiner in St. Louis this week. Give me a break. The Garner family doesn't fully understand why are we having so much time off, said Suzanne O'Hare, one of the Civilian Complaint Review Board lawyers prosecuting Pantaleo's case. It's a great burden. It's a great amount of anxiety and emotional stress for them. Maldonado agreed. I've expressed my frustration about this in conference and sidebars, she told Pantaleo's lawyers, Stuart London, before agreeing to suspend proceedings until June 5th. In a pretrial motion last month, Pantaleo's lawyers had asked Maldonado for last Friday off from trial as Pantaleo, who is still employed by the NYPD, had a scheduled vacation. At the time, Maldonado refused, but last week she agreed to recess court that Friday and on this Monday when Pantaleo's lawyers said they were unable to schedule witnesses on those days. This is what you call police stall tactics. You're talking 5 years now. 5 years since this man has been brutally, I call it, assassinated. This man has escaped criminal justice. He's not going to be tried criminally, which is an absurd embarrassment and disgrace. And he probably will get a slap on the wrist administratively, because this is the country we live in. It's an extension, frankly. I mean, what do you call it other than Jim Crow? They're executing black men and they're getting away with it. I know some police officers that are great men. And obviously there's female police officers. But there is a systemic rotting of the apple that's been going on since the beginning of time, where American business, American corporate media bow down. They fetishize the police, and that fetishizing and putting them up on pedestals, no matter what, is what allows them to execute black men with no repercussions, no real repercussions. And this comes down to presidential leadership too, because frankly, the criminal, we need to start at the beginning. Police reports. Should police reports be written by police involved in the situations? Or should we be talking more to witnesses? Do we need to start talking about, do we need legal observers with policemen at all times? That's the only way you're going to stop police from just, without even thinking, executing black men, but then after the fact, not covering it up with an alternative story. So I know Bernie Sanders is talking about criminal justice reform. I know Tulsi Gabbard is. I know Elizabeth Warren is. Kamala Harris claims to be, even though she locked up a lot of black men for no reason and threw away the key. But this is something, I don't see many media companies following up on Eric Garner. and this officer that murdered him. And that's a disgrace, if you ask me.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.